Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about the stats in this game. A question I get asked a lot is, do the stats really mean anything? And how important are they in, say, team building? So today we're going to take a look at that, the four main stats and also some hidden stats. So if we go to the character select, we can see four stats. We have pitching, hitting, fielding, and running, and as well as a few other hidden stats that I'll talk about later. So let's start with pitching. Pitching is a very interesting stat because it is probably just assigned by the developers. It doesn't have a one-to-one correspondence with really any attribute of a pitcher, because when you're pitching you can some pitchers can curve the ball a lot, some pitchers are faster, some pitchers have a really good lob, and as we can see, players like PD and even DK, they have a pretty decent hitting stat, and Bowser, even though they can't curve it at all. But Daisy and Baby Peach, they have great pitching stats, even though, Baby Peach is slower, but she can curve the ball a lot. And you can see this if I pitch with PD, I literally can't curve it off the plate, even if I try. And if I switch to someone like even Tiny Kong, she doesn't have a great pitching stat, but look at that curve. That is a pretty good curveball. So the pitching stat doesn't really correspond to anything. It's just put there by the developers as their best estimate to how good the pitcher is, and it does a pretty good job overall, I'd say, because I think Peach and Daisy and Baby Peach are some of the best pitchers, but Tiny Kong's definitely underrated, and not many people use her because her pitching stat isn't that high, but she definitely is good. So that's the pitching stat. And next up is hitting. So hitting is also interesting. I think the hitting stat is pretty accurate overall. And my guess is that it mostly corresponds to the power, because the top three best home run hitters in the game have the three best hitting stats. And players like DK and Funky have a lot of power. In terms of velocity off the bat, I think hitting stat, I don't know if it exactly corresponds to an actual stat in the game, but it is a pretty good estimate. However, players like Wario and Birdo have 8 out of 10 hitting, but they really are just line drive hitters. You don't really see many home runs from Wario because he really just mostly hits line drives, even though those are fast line drives and tend to go far. So I think the hitting stat usually corresponds to power. But you can see that Toad, his hitting stat is not that good. But Toad does actually have some great home run power. Wario you can see is a line drive hitter, but Toad, even though Yellow Toad especially, for some reason, even though he only has a 6 out of 10 hitting, he is just an absolute stud when it comes to hitting home runs because he hits a lot of pop flies. Same thing with Dark Bones. Dark Bones has the same hitting stat as his, other Dry Bones, but he seems to hit a lot more dingers than the other Dry Bones, or even the other, characters of the same hitting stat. And the reason why, especially on smaller fields, they're very, Yellow Toad and Dry Bones are much more valuable than their hitting stat would indicate because of their ability to hit flyouts, fly balls, even though they don't go far all the time. If they just barely get over the fence, that's really all that matters. Of course, players like PD, their hits, their home runs go farther, so it's harder to rob them, and so that's also valuable. But yeah, the hitting stat doesn't exactly correspond. I think Dark Bones definitely has other attributes that wouldn't be captured in the hitting stat, and that's why a lot of people love him. Even though I've always been skeptical if he's actually the best Dry Bones, but he may have some hidden attributes. And so next up is fielding. So the fielding stat is the most misleading stat in the game because unlike the pitching and batting, we know that it doesn't correspond to anything, and it's really just mostly terrible guesses by the developers to assign an attribute. So I've always thought it corresponded to bobble rate, but all characters have the same bobble rate. Shoutouts to Mr. Purple in my Discord for discovering that. So all the characters' feeling stats are just guesses, and you can see that players with super dives like Magic Koopa, Birdo, Baby Daisy, Shy Guy, they all have pretty good fielding stats, and they also have super dives. So players with super dives and just outfield abilities like Clamber, the developers gave really high fielding stats too, like Hammer Bro. So that's usually what the fielding stat means. That's pretty much what the fielding stat means in general. Is that the player has some, fielding special ability. It's why Peach also has it. Peach and Daisy Peach has quick throw, and that helps her a lot. But still, she is not like. Same with Waluigi. Her and Waluigi have quick throw, but they are really not the greatest infielders, and that's tricked me. I thought the fielding corresponded to bobble rate, and so it's really important to not just look at fielding when you're assembling your infield, but if the character has quick throw, usually their fielding stat is pretty good. So characters with super dives and strong arms and chemistry in the infield are really important, as well as height. Much more important than just straight up fielding stat. So fielding stat is very misleading. It doesn't really correspond to anything. And last up is running. The running stat is very helpful because it's pretty much an exact measure of how fast they are. It's very simple. It's just how fast is a character, both on the base paths and in the field. And I think that there's some weirdness going on in like other modes like Toy Field, where all characters run the same. And I'm not quite sure if that always happens in the actual field, but I think in the actual field, pretty much all the time, their actual speed is being captured. And you don't need the stat to tell you that. You can see who's faster and slower. But in general, fielding or running stat only really matters in the outfield. So when you're assembling your team, make sure to not put the slowest players in the outfield. Even if they have super dives, usually speed is pretty important. Which is why, but it still doesn't mean everything. And strong arms and super dives are also very important in the outfield. So those are the 4 main stats. And there are a few hidden stats in the game that the game doesn't really advertise to you, and a lot of people have wondered for a long time what they mean. Probably the biggest one is stamina. So if you're pitching in this game and you get a lot of hits on you, you're going to get tired. And Bowser Jr. might get tired soon because I'm getting a lot of home runs. So some characters seem to get tired way quicker than others. And I've always sort of thought that it was the powerful characters don't get tired as easy, which is sort of true, but the stamina stat is actually, if you look in the game's code, it's the opposite of the pitching stat. So good pitchers get tired quicker. That's exactly how it goes. So if you have lower pitching stat, it's like someone like Petey Piranha, then he will take longer to get tired. And this is why Bowser Jr. is taking pretty long to get tired. Baby Peach would have gotten tired already. So Bowser Jr. is taking a while to get tired because his pitching stat isn't the best. And it's fairly important to consider pitching stamina when you're using pitching, because if you have a pitcher like Tiny Kong, who's pretty underrated, and especially by the developers, and her pitching stat isn't that high, she can go a long time. But play like Waluigi, if you assemble a team of 4 Magic Koopas, they might barely last you a 9-inning game. Oh hey, Wario proved me wrong in getting a home run. So they might barely last you, a whole game. So it's really important to take into account stamina. And the other hidden stat is throwing speed. And I mentioned that before, pitching, but it's also very important in the field. So you can see Bowser Jr. got tired and they had to switch him out. So in general, the powerful characters have higher throwing speed. It's not exactly even though, because Birdo, I believe, has the fastest throwing speed in the game, and she is clearly not the, she only has an 8 out of 10 hitting stat, so I'm not exactly sure. It seems to be based on hitting power, but there's probably a few other factors at play. So when you're assembling your team, it's probably not the best idea to have an outfield like Baby Mario, Baby Luigi, and Yoshi, because they all have terrible throwing arms, especially if you're going on a field like... If you're going on a field like Peach Ice Garden, you might think that having all the fast players in the outfield is super important, but it takes a long time to get the ball into home plate, and if you play against level, especially level 1 CPUs, you'll see that you can get a lot of inside the park home runs because they do not have the arms to get it into home plate. So that's the stats in this game, and I think it's really interesting. And if you want to see more videos like this, make sure to like and comment and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. And I hope you enjoyed.